Hello and welcome back to a third video on ManCave Astronomy. Today we're going to be starting the process of doing a polar alignment. Really, it's about quarter to 10, August 28th, and it's dark outside, so we're really not going to see anything going, looking through the polar scope. I did shut the blinds because it gives a nice good white face in front of the polar scope, so we'll kind of go through some things, just show you some of the modifications that I've done, some of the setup process that you're going to have to go through on the mount to get a good polar alignment done, and pretty much going to do this in about 2 to 3 videos, and just kind of try to break it down at the very end. We're just gonna do, once we kind of familiarize ourselves and go through kind of all the initial things that you got to do. There's a lot of initial things. Once you kind of get the initial stuff done, once you get all those little things nailed down, really the polar alignment itself is very easy to do. I did it Saturday night, took it out, had a nice clear sky. Polar alignment just went very quick. Wasn't any big deal, and really was pretty much a walk in the park. When I got the scope and really looked through the manual and did a lot of reading, I kept seeing polar alignment doesn't necessarily have to be done to align the telescope. You can just basically, once you think, you can just throw this thing down, set the scope in it, balance everything out, and then point it at a couple stars and go. I don't see that. I don't see that happening after the few times I've set the scope up and actually had used it. Saturday night was the first time I really did a polar alignment, and things were pretty spot on. It really got me very close to the neighborhood of the star that I needed to align to, and this scope doesn't have any GPS on it. It doesn't have anything other than a grid and a time to align itself to. So going through the polar alignment process, which reading through the manual is just a painstaking process. Really, it's not. By the time you boil it all down and do some real simple modifications and basically dumbing things down to a normal level, it's really not any big deal to do. I did it within about 30 minutes. I had the mount set up, polar aligned, and had the scope on, and it took me about 10-15 minutes to get the scope good and balanced out once I had the scope set up. So I really didn't have any issue as far as the polar alignment part went. I did run into some issues with some of my longitude and latitude lines and coordinates, getting kind of everything synced up, but that was the first real full-blown out-of-the-box setup that I did Saturday. So there were some conquering and some defeats that I need to work through. So we'll go through that as we move through this series of videos, these tutorials on really how to get the most out of this scope. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the polar scope. The back of it here has got a little plastic cap. It's pretty cheesy, pretty flimsy, but it's nice to kind of help keep a little bit of dust and stuff off. And like I said before, this is your it's just got a little LED red light in it that highlights the little map of the North Celestial Pole and Polaris to kind of help you at night find Polaris, which actually it's got a adjustable position where you can change the brightness and everything else on the red inside there, but really when you turn it on you pretty much wipe out Polaris. So I found just clicking it on and off like this as I make my fine adjustments is about the best thing to do as far as getting it aligned to Polaris. So the other thing I did that you probably, if you have a Meade LXD75, you notice is These are actual Allen head bolts. I went down to the hardware store, picked up 3 of these for 80 cents for all 3 of them, and they're 4mm coarse thread, and took out the little Allen head grub screws that were in there and stuck these in, just because it actually gives me something I can twist and turn on and not actually have to deal with an Allen wrench to make any kind of adjustment while centering up this polar scope. We're going to go through that here in just a few minutes on what it's going to take to get this thing really truly aligned to your mount, your head, and getting the most out of your polar alignment. So in the front, this is your polar cap for your polar scope. And one thing that I'm going to cover real quick, one of the things that I did when I got this out of the box, and looking through Astronomy sheds, say it again because of my North Carolina draw, Astronomy shed website, was something that he did with his viewfinder, Skywatcher telescope, that I incorporated into this, which was a really brilliant idea. I probably, after the first night of doing this, I probably would have done it myself, but you can see here we got these nice little lineup points for your declination and your right extension. These don't come blacked out from Meade. They're just spray painted white or whatever, powder coated white. And they're very, very hard to see, if not impossible to see at night. So all I did was just take a Sharpie, black these in nice and black, made some nice little points, some little reference points, so at night it's very easy to see. It's a nice good contrast between the white background and the black points, and it really helps me to get this thing lined back up at night and make sure that I'm in the home position, or the park position as Meade calls it, when I'm done with my scope. Also, right here on the front, right under your weight bar, there's a degree wheel right here on your declination. This I've never really used this. I don't know that you may ever use this, but blacked it out anyway just to kind of keep everything in check. And one of the other things that I did was right here for your altitude. There's a little pointer right here. I blacked it out. I made a mark that is about here in North Carolina. We're sitting at about the 35-degree mark on the longitude. So, made a little line there to kind of help me at night adjust that in. Doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be exact. Just put a little reference there. Just at night, you can kind of get a ballpark, close idea on what you want to do. The other thing I did was right here in the back. See, I took my Sharpie and just made a straight line across here on the head when this thing is in the home position. And I also did the same thing here in the front. However, do not do this in the front, because when you do align these, your right extension motor, your declination motor is swung to the back side of the head mount, and what happens is when you turn this thing, you swing that right down and you hit your right extension motor box. So don't do that. Don't put a mark in the front. I'm going to get some brake clean and erase that. What you do want to do though, however, this is where we come to the back of the head, and what you do want to do is align these in the back. See if I can hold this with one hand while I tighten up the lock here. Alright, got that tightened down. We're close enough to being in line. And what that does, the reason we put those marks there, is because now when you look through your polar finder, you can see all the way through it. And what that is there's a rod that runs from your weight shaft. Your weight shaft screws into the bottom of the head. You've got your lock nut here to lock your shaft in to the bottom here on the declination head. And there's a rod that runs all the way through to the top part. And there's a big hole cut out here. As I turn this, you'll... Oops, wrong lock. Wrong lock. We'll edit that later for the bloopers. I was surprised I didn't say a cuss word, but where there it is. It's hiding under the cord. When you turn it, you see there. This is what it looks like when you're in the home position. You can't see through your viewfinder. This is with your scope pointing straight up at the sky. So what you got to do is turn this 90 degrees, lock it in so you can actually see through your finder scope. So now your scope is sitting, it's kind of hard to see with the cord I got wrapped up there so it don't get in our way. See, now our scope is sitting 90 degrees to the ground or to the sky, either way you go. So your scope is going to be facing this way, and that's what you gotta have your scope in this position to be able to look through your polar finder. So now that we got our scope in the setup position, just because a little OCD here, we're gonna align our marks just in the ballpark. You can see we can now look all the way through our viewfinder with no obstruction. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look back here at the back side. This is where all the good stuff is. There's 2 tables, 2 clocks, 2 clock rings, the black ring that you lock to the head, which is stationary when you lock it in, and then you got a secondary ring that moves actually with the right extension. That's the silver color ring here that moves with the polar finder, and I'm going to show you how to use that. We're going to just reach up here and unlock our right extension lock. So now we can turn the head. One thing that you do want to do when you're doing this is remove your scope mount ring lock knob. You want to just pull it all the way out, because when you don't have the rings in, you've got that backed off, and guess what happens when you swing this thing around? You hit your right extension motor case and you break it. Not that I broke it, but I'm surprised I haven't yet. So anyway, now we can turn our lock's hitting there. Now we can turn our head 360 degrees any way we want to. You can see that's why we wrap the declination cord around the head there so it doesn't get in our way, and we can turn this thing all the way around. Alright, now the next thing you're going to notice is when you turn right extension, your polar finder turns with it. And when you look through your polar finder, when you look at the little map that's inside there of the north celestial pole, it turns with the polar finder. So we're going to try to look through here and see if we can, there you go, you can see it a little bit. I know it's a little fuzzy, but I'm going to try to turn and keep this in focus. So it gives you an idea what you look at when you move it. Alright, so now that you're fully up to speed on the polar finder, there are some things that we got to do initially to make sure that when we do a polar alignment, we get this thing spot on. We want to make sure that when we go through this process, that everything that we do justifies us doing it by making sure we get a good polar alignment. So that's what we're going to do now. Is I'm going to take you through some of the stuff that we had to do, and hopefully it won't be as quite painstaking as some of the stuff that I went through to get this thing centered. And what I mean by center is because this head turns on an axis, and this is basically a scope looking through the center. There's some alignment process we're going to have to go through that is about as much fun as getting teeth pulled. And the Allen head screws that I had put in and took out those little grub screws that were in there really helped with that process. And that's why I highly recommend going down to the hardware store and picking you up 3 of these and just taking out those 3 little Allen head screw little grub screws that are in there and go ahead and putting these in, because this really did simplify this process. It took me about 3 days to really go through all this and get it set up and aligned and locked in. Once you go through this process, as long as you're pretty delicate with the head and moving the tripod and stuff around, and you don't bump into it or really hit it, you should never have to really worry about this again. It's a good thing to check it every once in a while just to make sure, but you hopefully shouldn't have to do this but one time. And I'll go through this process real quick. It's more painstaking than it is really technical. Basically what you want to do is, just like you see here, your LED battery tube and your on-off switch is set up for Meade. Basically the way it's set up, in case you pull this out, you can pull this whole scope assembly out, and you can put it over on the side, and 3 days later and 7 beers later come back and say, damn, I don't remember where this thing was supposed to be positioned at. Nice enough, and thank God that I come to the conclusion that if you take your scope and align your marks just like this, lock your right extension in, and you can leave your head, like I said before, take your head, line up your mark, make your mark here in the back, and then once you do that, just turn and align your declination mark and lock that clutch in. And now when you put your scope in, when you look through it, your viewfinder, the cross in the center with the long tail going straight down to the south, that's how you want your viewfinder oriented. And you can tell mine is just either it's just a touch off, or I'm not holding the camera level. Probably not holding the camera level, because I went through this the other day and we were pretty much level in our lines. I am just a little bit off. See, it is a fairly touchy process to go through. Now, when we look back through here, we are perfectly in the south position with our cross. Okay, and you see the little box up there. That box is completely irrelevant. That is for the southern hemisphere. And Meade put that in here because they sell this scope to not only 50 other countries, including Australia in the southern hemisphere. That's the alignment marks that you'll use. Here in the northern hemisphere, we use the cross. with the long tail coming off, and the 40 and the 60 degree mark. Okay, and in between the 40 and the 60 degree mark, you'll see a little circle. That is your Polaris star mark. And what you want to do is make sure that Polaris is inside that circle. And when you set your time to when Polaris peaked, that Polaris is going to be in that circle, and the cross is actually the celestial north axis. That's what we align our scope to, and from there the scope will do all the other measurements. So I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really not that bad. Alright, now the process of how do we get our mount aligned to Polaris in the northern celestial hemisphere. Okay, first thing we got to do is in the home position, just like we got it, we look through our viewfinder and our polar finder, not the viewfinder on top of the telescope, but the polar finder. And when you look through, you want the long end of the cross all the way straight down, even with the azimuth bolt and like the head fixing screw. You want that line going all the way through, straight down. So once you got that, and your top of your mount and everything is in the home position, you lock everything in, and you want to set this top black ring to the 0 position. And it is a clock, a 24-hour clock, and it goes, you know, 0, 1, 2 all the way around to 24. Okay, you want to lock that in nice and tight. I had to take a pair of pliers and lock mine down to make sure it didn't move, and even now it still moves. You know, you can see it moves just a little bit, but that's okay, it's close enough, it's in a good enough position. Now the other thing we're going to want to do is in the home position is the 12-hour ring, the silver ring. We want to align it to 0. Okay, so now we're 0 and 0. The 0 is in between the 1 and the 12. Line them up, 0 mount, with the long end of the cross going straight south to the bottom of the mount. Now we're set. Now that we got all that done, the other thing we want to do is unlock our declination, or excuse me, our right extension, and we want to move the mount 180 degrees. We want to line it up with 6 o'clock. Alright, lock our clutch in. Alright, now we're 0 and 6. Okay, now you got to be careful on the time rings, on the silver time ring, because the actual number 6 is not right beside the line that is for 6 o'clock. It is right in the middle, or actually it's sitting right on to be honest with you, I don't even know what you would call that. But we're, I guess that's about 6:40, because I think this is in 20-minute increments. So it's sitting at about 6:40, but actually 6 o'clock mark is right here, the long line. But sorry, I got a little off focus there. Too busy counting the lines. The long mark is the 6 o'clock mark. The next mark is the 7 o'clock mark. The in-between lines are 20-minute lines. Each one of these is, let's see here, 6. Each one of these, I think, is 5. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. You can go through and count them and figure them out. But anyway, for the purpose of this video, you want to line up 0 with 6. Okay, now when you look through,